active involved, but they were Margaret.
Welcome back to the Law News Network, everybody. This is your host, Jesse Weber. We are cutting out of that testimony the Adam Matos case because we are having two special segments to talk about right now in the area of sports law. The first one I want to talk about is Ezekiel Elliott. This is an update in the case of the Dallas Cowboys running back. The United States Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit denied the NFL Players Association's motion for an emergency injunction that would have further delayed Elliott's 6-game suspension for alleged domestic violence incidents. And now that that suspension is back in place, what is going to happen? Well, we have to talk about everything that's happened so far and where we move forward. So any sports fans, any fans of the Dallas Cowboys, or any fans of Zeke, let's talk about it right now. And here, to help me talk about this case, as well as we're also going to talk about the legalization of sports gambling, we're here to help me talk about it is sports law attorney Anthony Tall. Mr. Tall,
how
great
you
to see
guys
you.
doing?
Good. Thank you so much for joining us. Okay, I want to start off with the Ezekiel Elliott story. Let's start from the beginning and we'll move to where we're at now. What is the domestic violence incident? What is going on there? We'll start from there and we'll move from there. What domestic violence incident?
Okay. Well, what initially happened, or what Ezekiel Elliott was accused of, was he was accused of particularly having a domestic violence incident with his living girlfriend. Now, the problem that the NFL had was that there was no arrest made. But the NFL, basically through the power of Roger Goodell, following up on the Ray Rice incident and a lot of the political flack that he took from that, decided that they were going to investigate, and regardless of the Constitution says, regardless of what the law says, the NFL has its own rules. And if their investigator determines that there's enough evidence to feel as if he should be disciplined, that they will discipline him. So they did discipline him, and they initially suspended him 6 games. Now, the problem with that is, the problem that the NFLPA has with that is that's basically going to set a standard and a precedent, because Roger Goodell has almost carte blanche discretionary power to do whatever he wants to do to discipline, particularly when facts aren't in his favor. Now, there's a report out there that what initially happened was there was one report that one of the actual investigators for the NFL, actually found that the girl was not credible. That's one of the reports out there, and she put that in her report. It looks as if the NFL and Roger Goodell overlooked that and went ahead and disciplined him anyway. So now we've been maturating through the court process. There's been initially the 6-game stay was overruled, and then it was reinstated. And then Ezekiel went back into court and appealed that and got an injunction to play again. And then he's played all season, by the way. He hasn't missed the game. But late 2 nights ago, the Second District of New York Court ruled that that he can't play. And he tried to get another emergency hearing, and the New York Court of Appeals is not going to hear that again until December 1st. So he is set to actually miss, for the first time, 2 games.
Okay, let's back up a little bit. So there was a domestic violence incident, these allegations. The Roger Goodell, the NFL decided to take matters into their own hands, do their own investigation. It seems that they didn't do a very thorough investigation. It seems that Mr. Elliott was not given the proper due process in a way to really fight his case. The suspension happened, but we know the NFLPA filed a lawsuit against the NFL, and then as you said, they tried to institute an injunction, something that would prevent the suspension from taking place, so that Mr. Elliott can come on the field, still play while all this is being resolved. Now, from the beginning, they were first granted an injunction, correct? There was a judge in Texas who first said, I'm going to grant this injunction. And can you explain a little bit what the rationale there was, why he felt that it's necessary to have an injunction? Remember, an injunction just basically stops certain proceedings from taking place while it prevents the suspension from taking place while the case is being pending. So this judge in Texas originally said, okay, we want this injunction. Can you explain why?
Well, the injunction that he initially ruled on, he found as if there was, obviously, as you know, in an injunction, you just have to say that there's a likelihood of success on the merits, and that there's a reason for the judge to believe that if it does go forward, once it does go to a full hearing, that he's going to succeed on the merits. So that's what that judge in Texas had initially found out. He granted that injunction because he believed that there was enough evidence for this to be successful on the merits. And since then, there's just been this. You got to remember that this is a tug of war that's been going on way beyond Ezekiel Elliott and way beyond, his thing. This will go all the way back years, and then we experienced it last year and almost for 2 years with Brady and Deflategate. So, a lot of these injunctions, a lot of these cases filed, like I said, are there to set a precedent, and that precedent is going to be whether the NFLPA has any leverage, which under the collective bargaining agreement, they don't, and whether the NFL has all the leverage. So when there's a disciplinary act taken by Roger Goodell, and that disciplinary act seems as if he's just making a ruling because he can, because he has the power. His empowerment is the fundamental violation of substantive due process. They're going to go into court, and some courts are going to agree with them, and some are not. And this, in the Texas case, we see what happened, and that's where we're at right now. So.
Right, and I think that judge really felt that there was at least one person involved in this, the NFL's director of investigations, Kia Roberts, who's basically said that she didn't find, like you said, she didn't find the accuser to be credible. So that was why that judge in that case said, okay, I think there's more to this case than the NFL is saying, and we're going to grant this injunction. However, it didn't last. There was that injunction was rescinded by another judge, and then now we kind of see what's been happening here. They've tried to have it reinstated, and there's been legal maneuvering to try and see what happens with the suspension. Ultimately, as you said, what happened is that the Second Circuit Court of Appeals, they denied the injunction. Can you explain a little bit why they denied the injunction? And let's not forget, this is also maybe they were taking some of the arguments that were made by a lower court who also denied the injunction previously. So maybe you can explain a little bit about why right now Ezekiel Elliott's suspension is going to take effect.
Well, in a nutshell, and the quick answer to your question is pretty much they just found as if the NFL and NFLPA's collective bargaining agreement that Roger Goodell had not exceeded his bounds, and that's generally what this comes down to. Has he exceeded his bounds? The rationale was that they don't need any type of extra superfluous information to prove whether or not he can discipline him. They went into an agreement that any player conduct that the NFL uses its investigators for, and those investigators find anything that they believe is credible, if they take it to Roger Goodell and Roger Goodell feels as if there's enough to discipline the players, that's what they're going to go with. Now, if you remember a couple of days ago or yesterday, it came down that Jerry Jones, the owner of the Cowboys, is threatening to sue if the NFL owners renew Roger Goodell's contract. So this could be a big fight. And you have to remember, I'm going to talk a little sports here. You have to remember, Ezekiel Elliott is the key to the Dallas Cowboys, and Jerry Jones, being a former football player and being an owner of the Cowboys for years, knows this. He knows that Dak needs a running back. He's a young quarterback. He's good, but he knows that he needs a running back. And he knows Ezekiel Elliott is that line. After that, can take some pressure off of the quarterback. That's very important. So Jerry Jones, being the charismatic and kind of character that we all know him as, is not going to take this laying down, particularly after he's had a couple of victories in court himself. So he's not going to take this laying down. So his long-term game is to try to at least get Roger Goodell to say, okay, maybe I'll reduce it to 3 games, something like that. Well, otherwise he's threatening to sue. So he's going to sue the NFL, the other owners, if they extend Goodell's contract. Now that goes into a whole bunch of other issues with the protests and everything. But the major reason is because he wants his player to play. He wants Ezekiel Elliott out there so he can win.
He's been saying, Jerry Jones has been saying, wait a second, this has nothing to do with Ezekiel Elliott. I just want to talk about the contract here. It's nothing about that. But no one believes him, right?
Right, absolutely. It has nothing to do with the contract. As a matter of fact, we have every reason to believe that this was a very good relationship between him and Roger Goodell. And then all of a sudden this case came up, and Cowboys don't do good when they don't have Zeke out there. And He wants his players. So we all know what it's about. He might say it's about other things, that he might even have a little bit of interest in those other things. But his major interest is he wants his running back out there, superstar running back out there, because they win with this guy.
Do you think that there really was unfairness for him in terms of, like, we've seen judges say in the past in terms of the injunction that he was given the proper time to fight his case in front of the arbitrator, and that there really is no fundamental unfairness here, that this suspension is just. Do you believe that, or do you think that really he does have a claim here that he wasn't given a fair shake?
I believe he had. Remember, I'm a sports agent, so I'm always going to side with the player for the most part.
You're biased.
So
I get it. It's okay.
Bias in me saying that, but the reality is, I do believe he has a claim. I do believe that there has to be some type of fundamental fairness in these agreements. I do believe that, and one of the things that is kind of mind-boggling is you need to remember that he was never charged. He was never charged. Now, I know in a lot of DV cases, a lot of times victims recant, and we're kind of used to, I do a lot of DV cases, and we're kind of used to that. But the reality is, not only did she recant, the NFL's own investigator believes she was not credible, or had some evidence, or as the reports say, to the extent that maybe this did not happen or it didn't go down the way that it's been reported. So with that being the case, yeah, I do think we have to raise substantive due process issues, or otherwise this guy, Roger Goodell, is going to be able to, have carte blanche authority for the remainder of the contract, and if he gets it renewed, it could be trouble. And we saw what happened with Tom Brady. And Tom Brady won and then eventually lost. So the NFLPA is going to fight this.
One of the judges, Circuit Judge Dennis Jacobs, told the NFL's lawyer that he can't understand why there's such a frantic emergency that it can't wait another couple of months. Just to break it down for our viewers, let's understand. If he was granted this preliminary injunction, that was it. So now his suspension is delayed. How long would that delay last? How long would that delay last? When would he fight that out? So let's say, I know he has an upcoming hearing. How would it work?
Well, he has an upcoming hearing, and the hearing is on December 1st. So now, at this point, the Cowboys play 4 games before December 1st, because remember, they have that Thanksgiving game. And the Cowboys, that's a huge amount of time, huge amount of games. You could get knocked out at NFL playoffs. The Cowboys aren't doing that bad, but if they lose 2 or 3 of those games, it puts them in a significant compromising position with regard to them being able to make the NFL playoffs. So if the hearing is December 1st and he gets reinstated, and that reinstatement takes months, then you're talking about perhaps him being out for the rest of the season, which is 8 games. And 8 games without Ezekiel Elliott, I'm guaranteeing you that if they play the Eagles, the Redskins, and 1 or 2 times, they're going to lose about 3 or 4 of those games. And I believe they've already lost 3 this season. So it's not looking good if that's the case. That's why they want to expedite this hearing that they just lost yesterday, the other day, so they could get in there and get him to play all throughout. Definitely the next 2 or 3 games during the Thanksgiving break and all of those games.
Let me see if I understand this. I thought it was a 6-game suspension, right? So I thought it was a 6-game suspension. So if he's already going to miss, I think you said 4 games from now until December 1st, wouldn't it only be 2 more games that he would have to miss? Why doesn't he just, okay, I know it's huge for the Cowboys. You miss 1 game, you miss 2, missing 6 is a lot. But at the end of the day, to go through these legal loopholes, just keep jumping these legal hurdles for 6 games, if he's already going to miss 4 because of when this is going to be expedited, don't you just, whatever, it's 2 more games.
Yeah, those 2 games can be huge. And if he misses 6 games, remember there's only about 8 games left in the season. So 6 games, you lose 4 of those games, and you're out of the NFC playoffs. So that's why it's important now. He tried to expedite it where he wouldn't miss any of these games, at least get a stay on it so he could play until the next hearing, which is December 1st. But now it looks as if he's going to have to wait till December 1st, and he's going to miss those 4 games in between now and December 1st. And what I was saying is, if there's any type of more legal maturation, or he wins, let's say he wins December 1st, and then they have about 4 more games, 3 or 4 more games left, and then he gets suspended again, he basically has missed the whole season, except maybe 2 games. He'll have like the last 2 games, and at that point, those 2 games could be irrelevant.
So initially, his best case scenario would have been, and correct me if I'm wrong, and this will be the most we talk about this case, but if he won his injunction in the beginning and that was it, right? So that 6-game suspension would have been delayed. Would that have been delayed until he can work through the case in the off season, and then we'll worry about the suspension for next season?
Yeah, that would have been the ideal situation where he could have been able to get the case over after the season, But obviously, the NFL went in there and got everything turned back around in their favor. They have the right to make an injunction or request an early or emergency hearing just as much as he does. So obviously, ideal in these situations, he would have got the injunction, he would have got it stayed, then he would have played throughout the season, and then the Cowboys and Jerry Jones would be obviously hoping that in January he doesn't get, they get into the playoffs, and then in January they don't go to court, and then he's out for the playoffs. So you wanted to extend it as long as possible if you were Jerry Jones and the Cowboys, but the NFL wanted to make it as soon as possible so they could have the deterrent effect on other players and on other teams. Because if he gets to play the whole season, they go win the Super Bowl, then he misses the first, then ultimately he loses, then maybe he gets it knocked down to 4 games, then they've already got everything out of it. So that's really would have been the best case scenario for the Cowboys, but it didn't turn out that way.
No, it's not looking so good for them. I wouldn't put my stock in them right now, but we'll have to see what happens. In the meantime, we'll keep following the Ezekiel Elliott case and make sure to have you on to talk about that. But I do now, because we have you, I want to talk about the next issue we have to talk about. We're going to talk about the legalization of sports betting. The New Jersey Supreme Court will hear oral arguments on December 4th and would ultimately make a ruling that could effectively open the doors to legalize sports gambling. This is a case of Christie v. the NCAA. The court will decide whether a federal statute that requires states to prohibit gambling violates the anti-commandeering doctrine of the 10th Amendment. I'm talking about a lot of different things here. Let's start from the beginning, okay? Let's talk about this statute. It's called the PASPA. What is it? Let's start from the beginning. What is this federal statute?
Well, the federal statute was basically put in place. As you know, a lot of these sports leagues, they have antitrust laws. And one of the things that comes with a lot of antitrust is you have to have this ideal that the sports are going to be honest, clean, and played without any type of bias or prejudice, or the game isn't going to be cheated. So you get this statute, and the statute basically says that you can't gamble, because if you gamble in the state, you're commandeering the antitrust laws are basically commandeering the state to include criminal activity, because a lot of these statutes are written against racketeering and criminal activity. So we don't want the state being focused on criminal activity and racketeering. So we don't really want gambling in sports. That's the theory behind it. Now in practice, we have fantasy football. People go to Vegas. People can place bets in Vegas and out of Atlantic City all the time. So in theory, that statute was there, and that's probably why it's threatened to not be. It's threatened to get overturned or ruined against this, because you're not off of gambling in the sports. And we have fantasy football, which has just become so huge, and sports in general. So that's basically the history and policy behind it.
Right. Anthony, you broke up a little bit, but we'll recap what you said. So we're talking about the Professional Amateur Sports Protection Act, the PASPA, prohibits states from sponsoring, advertising, operating, or authorizing any betting, gambling, or wagering on amateur or professional sports. So states they're under this federal law, states can't have professional sports gambling. Now, the act actually made an exception for certain states. We're talking about that there was state-sponsored gambling in Nevada, sports lotteries in Delaware and Oregon. What we're talking about is New Jersey, okay? Didn't New Jersey have the option to be grandfathered into this clause? Because we know they have Atlantic City. This law was from 1992. Didn't they have the option to go be a part of this law, and they just didn't choose to take it?
They did. And the reason why they did not take it is baffling to a lot of people. But from all the research, it looks as if they had the option to be grandfathered in, and now they find themselves in court.
So now, what is their argument exactly? What are they saying? Why they think the PASPA is unconstitutional and they shouldn't have to follow it? And now, what's their argument? And then we'll move into some of the more specifics part of it and what the NCAA and the leagues who are going against New Jersey here, what their argument is. But let's start. What is New Jersey's argument in this case?
Well, it's generally going to be a First Amendment argument, the First Amendment to free speech. And lately we've had a lot of cases coming out of the Supreme Court with regard to voting that attaches money you spend with speech. So their first argument is going to be free speech. If you want to gamble, if you want to place your money is an aspect of your speech. So therefore, your freedom to associate, your freedom to associate with whatever team and favor that team that you like is limited by the fact that you're not able to spend money the way you want to on that team. If you want to spend money on that team, if you want that team to play, if that team is playing against your rival team and you want to say, my speech believes that this team will beat this team, and I want to put my money so my speech can speak louder on it, that's going to be the argument.
But what about this 10th Amendment argument? So they're saying, the way that I understand is there's this anti-commandeering principle in the 10th Amendment. They're saying that under this principle, Congress can't require states to adopt a regulatory scheme when the federal government itself has never adopted a scheme. And so the PSPA is commandeering the state's own law enforcement system. They're saying they're forcing them to not have sports gambling. It's effectively forcing them to do something. Isn't that what the New Jersey's argument is? They're saying that's why it's unconstitutional?
Well, yeah, and then we're getting back into the old states' right argument that we've been going back and forth on a lot since the 60s, 40s. You know, a lot of the states' rights argument is what was used in the South for segregation and things like that. So here's the issue. The 10th Amendment basically grants states individual rights against the federal government, and the federal government can't come in and commandeer or trample on states' rights. So the argument for New Jersey is obviously a states' rights argument. The federal government is forcing us to do something, forcing our citizens to do something that they don't want to do. And the federal government has overstepped their bounds. So is it a smart argument? Is it an argument that can work? It does work sometimes, as we've seen states' rights has achieved a lot. The argument becomes whether or not the federal government has impeded or the word commandeering requires some burden that they have to prove. And I don't know if this statute, which was put into place basically to kind of fight racketeering, is really commandeering, or whether or not the federal government's interests will outweigh that. And that's what lawyers get paid for. They're going to go into court and hash that thing out.
Yeah, and then the NCAA and the leagues are going to say, this isn't forcing us to do it. This isn't forcing the states to do anything. And at the end of the day, I think that if it gets tossed out, the federal government will just they could create a law that they follow. They say there's no sports gambling, and it's on the federal level, and the states would have to follow it. Anthony Tall, thank you so much for joining us here to talk about both of these cases. We really appreciate your time, and we'd love to have you back to talk about more cases in the sports arena.
Thank you.
Thank you.